Timeline breakpoints. Okay, here's the point of doing timeline breakpoints. You need to figure out whatever the things you've split apart, points in time relative to when an impact or the bad thing occurs that you need to know. These are goals of, let's say my ability to produce teddy bears, and I'm a teddy bear manufacturer. My ability to produce that gets disrupted. How much time am I willing to have it disrupted for? Do I have to start producing teddy bears again within a week, within a day, within a month, whatever? How much time am I willing to tolerate? So you can think about this on sort of like a timeline. We have a timeline. We have some sort of impact, so we can draw like some sort of like lightning bolt here. There's a lightning bolt, there's an impact at a point. And then some point ahead of the impact, there's going to be a point in time. The jargon term for this is the RTO, the recovery time objective. But the point is that this is the I have to be up now point. This is the point in time I have to be up at. You're going to determine what that is. And then back here, you have a point at which you can basically afford to lose stuff. This often comes up in like computer backups. So let's say that you have a disruption and this is the point of your last backup. If you back up once a week, this difference here is the amount of data that you've lost because you haven't backed it up. So if you decide to back up once a week, then you have a maximum amount of data loss or work loss of 1 week. This point is often called the RPO, the recovery point objective. Once again, jargon term, but this is how much work can I lose, right? That's the point of that. The biggest part of this timeline breakpoint section is to just conceptually think up, once you understand this and you can kind of really get the concept of what these things are, all that you really need to do is write out your various functions or processes or whatever you've decided to do in this whole BIA section. So for example, we would have function, and then we did sales. I'm doing the same thing as we did in the impact assessment video, but whatever you did in other videos, you just do the same things here. We have sales, ops, admin, finance, IT, and marketing. So all you would really need to do is you figure out what these are, because you already have those. And then you record in terms of time or numbers your RTO and your RPO. And you don't have to call these RTO and RPO. You can call them whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. As long as you have something that indicates to you time I need to be back up by and amount of work I'm allowed to lose. Whatever that is, you need a time in here. Let's go down the list and think about this. We have a sales department. You have an amount of sales you're willing to not do over a certain amount of time. For whatever reason, your sales becomes not operational. How much are you willing to lose? How much time are you willing to lose in sales? So your sales is interrupted because you have one salesperson that does all of your major corporate business and they die, or they get really sick, they're in a coma, they quit, they get poached by another company, whatever. The critical part of your sales department is now gone and you've lost your sales. How long are you willing to go until it is intolerable and you must have that sales operational again? That is your kind of magic number here. I'm going to introduce another concept now, because if you go deeper into this sort of stuff and if you research it, you may come across this magic term, this sort of like magic number. Past this RTO, there is another hidden thing right kind of at the end here. And this is something called the MTO. That is the maximum tolerable outage. The MTO is the real doomsday time. So there's the time at which it has to be back up or you are completely doomed. I was going to use a different word, but I'm going to be polite. So until you're done, right? So you have a maximum time there. And then you have the time that you're choosing to say, I'm going to be up back by then. That's your RTO. The important number to decide on is not when am I dead? It's how dead am I willing to be before that point? Because your RTO, this number here is going to be your goal number. This is going to be the there's nothing I can do number. You could decide to put your RTO at your MTO. You could decide to say, I'm just going to go to the absolute limit. You could. You could put your RTO past it. That would be pointless. You're already dead. Normally, people will say, I'm willing to tolerate this much risk. So I know that this is the point which is absolutely nothing I can do. That is miserable. I don't want to experience that. I'm willing to experience this. I'm willing to do that much. I'm willing to deal with that, so I'm going to put my number there. So this is a you decide number, not the you're forced to decide number. So you might say, look, if I don't bring in any new sales in a year, I'm done. I don't want to do that again. I already built my business from the ground up. I don't want to rebuild it again from the ground up. I don't want to shrink that much. So I'm going to tolerate the point that I want to be back up by, that amount of time I'm willing to lose here. I'll do 3 months because it's going to be miserable. But anything more than 3 months and it's too miserable, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to do that. I'm going to pick that number. Now, why am I going over all these different times and all this kind of stressing this so much? The quicker you need to be up by, the more expensive it is. And the earlier you can start making money again, or the earlier you can start doing whatever the thing is again. This is a difficult pill to swallow for a lot of people. Some people want to be up right now, and then they look at the cost of doing that, and they go, I don't have that money. And then they realize they have to stretch this, and then, oops, it sounds like I'm going to have a really bad time if the bad thing happens. Conversely, some people don't want to spend any money on this at all, and then they realize how far back that they have to go and how long they're going to be down for, and then they go, oh no, that's pretty close to this magical doomsday number. I don't want to do that. And they figure out that they actually have to start spending a bunch of money on solutions to this. Let me give you an example to help illustrate this. So an example of different RTOs. So let's say we have the problem of internet down. So our internet is down, and we want to get it back up at different times. If my internet's down and I want to get back up and running, it could be down because lack of computers, whatever. You could adopt a strategy of wait it out and buy new computers, so have nothing in place, and you could probably solve internet down and rebuild most systems in a month. So you could pretty much do nothing, throw money at it if it happens, that you could pretty much do on a 1 month timeline. If you want to make sure you're back up within a week, you could probably buy special package from ISP, your internet service provider. You could buy some sort of special package that guarantees your backup quicker, some corporate package or something from an internet service provider, and you can probably get that. If you want to be back up within the hour, I'm going to separate these here. Okay, so our problem is internet down. If you want to be back up within the hour, you could 2 ISPs. You could have 2 internets. And that would probably, so you're doubling your internet cost potentially. You'd probably be back up within 1 hour. If you want to be back up in 0.3 milliseconds, because you don't want to be down at all, you have to have a personal relationship with IBM. You can do that. You can be back up at the speed of the internet. It can be done. It is really expensive. And that is 0.3 milliseconds. Okay, so depending on what your solution is, how quickly you want to be up, these things are all different sorts of expenses and etc. If you have a business that is doing huge amounts of transactions rapidly, and you're doing global transactions, think your eBays, your Amazons, your global markets where if they're down, they're losing huge amounts of revenue because they have to make sure that they're available. They're investing in backup systems, redundant pathways for internet. They have a whole internet reliability strategy. They at minimum definitely have a relationship with IBM. But this whole thing gets way, way, way more expensive. Case in point. So anyways, different strategies applied to this. You go through your different things and you figure out when you need it back up by. Now, there's two ways to also do that. You can look at this from the perspective of the business, of when does the business need this back up, or you can look at this from the perspective of the given thing, the given function, the given process. I personally prefer to go based on the given function or process. So you ask sales, hi sales, when do you need to be operational by to do your job? So after, let's say sales goes down, at what point am I going to know that you're down? Right? When does that sort of stop? And then how long are you allowed to be down for until it is a problem? When do you need to be up by? Right? And this is going to be a bit of a give and take between them and you, because sales might say, well, I mean, realistically, I can be down for, 3 months, and then you're not going to even notice because our sales cycle's so long. And then, the business goes, okay, but I see new reports from you X amount of time. So really, how long is this? And you have a bit of a give and take, you have a bit of a conversation, and you figure out what the number is. Either way, you want to figure out basically how long until you need the thing back up that you're comfortable with. You have that conversation. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that this is an organization that does corporate to corporate sales. They're negotiating larger contracts, so there's a longer sales cycle. They have a big focus on client retention. Client acquisition is, once again, longer deals. You're not making, one major sale every 3 seconds. You're not making a sale every 3 seconds. You're making one major sale every 3 months because you're doing a major contract or something. Fine. The sales RTO is probably over a month. So we can put this at, for the sake of argument, let's put it at a month. Let's put it at 1 month, because let's say that this business also does some of its client relations through sales, and it wants to be able to do some stakeholder relations and make sure that everyone's happy. And, once it goes a bit too long, they're worried about losing clients and whatever, it's a month. Maybe this is less, maybe this is more. You can debate it. We're putting it at a month for now. Okay. Do all the RTOs first, just for your own sanity. Look at operations. How long can we be down for? Now, this is a business that is building things for other corporate clients. So think about OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. So someone that's part of a supply chain in making tractors or something. They build a part that's part of a larger manufacturing chain. This company is going to need to be online with ops. Gaining new clients is one thing. They might have 2 or 3 big clients that make up to 70% plus of all their revenue. If their assembly line shuts off, they risk losing half of their business because the person they're supplying gets fairly angry. So their RTO on this might literally be a day. It might be a day. They might say, I'm not going down for more than a day. Fine. It might be less than that, just depends, but just as an example. Admin, same thing here. So what does this company do? We do these sorts of sales with a few clients. Fine, we produce the stuff. What does admin need to do? Well, admin is probably going to support all this stuff. Admin is going to need to approve certain things getting done. Maybe, ops can keep operating without admin, but admin says, I can catch up on a week's paperwork. Once it goes last more than a week, I get so buried, I just can't do anything. Now, I want to caution something here. At this point, because ops is probably going to be dependent on admin, you're going to want to think about this in terms of dependencies, which is a different section. Don't focus on how often admin needs to be up so ops is happy. Focus on how often admin needs to be up so admin's happy. Focus on the individual thing. So how much backlog can admin do? If admin is reasonably shut down, for how long? How much of work stoppage and building up of backlog can it tolerate until it's complete chaos and unacceptable? Now, later on, the business may decide that admin can shove it and it doesn't care, and the business is going to impose a longer RTO on admin. It could do that. But for now, admin says, look, I need to be back up by this amount of time, or this is ridiculous, it's unacceptable. What is admin's number? Okay? They're either going to say, we're go-getters and we can handle it and we can do a really far number, don't worry about it, we got this. Or they're going to go, nah, I ain't doing that, get me up by now. You're going to have those two different dynamics. They could underestimate, they could overestimate. As best you can, try to find as close to the real number of what it is. And you have the dynamic with all these sections. It's just, I've seen both, it happens. Okay, admin, let's say they can probably, with the business in particular I'm thinking about, they had a week. They could do a week. They could do a week all day. Is finance doing the managing of your money? Is finance handling accounts? Is this checks being delayed? Is this investments? What is this? If this is the section of your business that is paying bills, the reality is you don't have to pay bills on time. You often have to pay bills before you violate a contract or before you hit a clause where it becomes a problem. So you can be without a bank for a bit. It depends. A lot of organizations, when they get right down to it, they probably have 30 to 60 days, depending on how their contracts work. So with finance, very often the RTO is somewhere in the ballpark of about a month. If finance is tied to payroll, and you can't pay people, and then you have risks of work stoppages. If you work in the sort of business where if people don't get paid, they walk, and then you're shut down and you're like, nope, I'm not doing it. If you view this as payroll risk, this might be 2 weeks. It just kind of depends. For the sake of argument here, we'll say that this is just accessing bank account, and we'll put it at a month, but it might magically change. So we have 1 month for now. IT is going to say, how long can I be down until it's intolerable from the perspective of IT? Now, most businesses are just going to put IT at like an hour or a day because they're so dependent on them. They're just going to assume it. The reality is, for this, from the perspective of IT, how long can IT afford to be down until IT says this is unworkable? I can't, this is unacceptable. I can't kind of make up for what I'm doing. This isn't how long until IT starts fixing the problem. This is how long until IT has successfully fixed the problem. So this isn't instant for almost anybody. This is going to be, this is how much leeway I have to really fix my issue. How long do I have? For most businesses that are larger, they're going to throw a lot of money at this, and this is going to be somewhere under a week probably to at least get back to some level of functionality so things can work. I'm going to magically say this is a day, but depending on who you are, this could be way more. It just depends. Marketing for this given company, this is advertising their presence in the market, because we've already said that this company is dependent on very few small clients in the specific equipment manufacturer. So they're part of making tractors or whatever. They don't really care if the consumer knows about them. They're focused more on being featured in engineering magazines, professional white papers. They're speaking to a very specific clientele, and they're focused more on being present within a specific industry. They're not putting, commercials on the news constantly. They're probably issuing press releases that are targeted to a specific industry. The marketing probably will include their appearance at a conference for whatever their specialization is that might happen semi-annually or annually. This is going to be a longer thing, generally speaking. A lot of companies with this sort of thing might be willing to just 6 months lose marketing for half a year. They can just say, it's fine. We can tolerate it. We can make up. If this blows one of our conference appearances, then we just lose it. We're not missing 2 years in a row. We might need planning cycle for this. Fine, but we'll do 6 months. It's fine, right? We'll recover. It's fine. Now, conversely, a company that wants to really focus on their market presence in this thing might say, no, I can't lose that. But in general, this could be the sort of thing you might see. Recovery point objective. This is the how much work am I willing to lose, not when do I have to be back up by. So I have an interruption. The last time I backed up was how much work am I willing to lose? Very often, this will not apply to certain things. So for sales, you don't magically lose the phone call that you had. You didn't absorb something into a black hole of time. You still have that phone call. What you might lose is the data of who those numbers were. You might lose the record of the call. If it was tied to a server, you didn't write it down somewhere. So how much of that are you willing to lose? Most professional salespeople are going to be able to reproduce basically from memory in under 5 minutes every conversation they've had in the last week. They know who they talk to. If they lost the number, they can figure out where they found it. They probably took individual notes, and if not, they can recall it real fast. This is what they do. I know some professional salespeople that can basically produce every important conversation they've had in the last half of a quarter, really 3 months. They can tolerate a pretty serious RPO. Very often, frankly, they're not even tied to the business backups, and they can just handle it. Depends on the type of sales. If you're someone who gets audited frequently, and for whatever reason this is integrated into that, and there's a regulatory risk associated with this, and if you lose these backups, you have to reproduce them, this might be a much shorter number. It just kind of depends. So regardless, you pick a number. For sales, I'm going to say that this particular company I'm thinking of, we'll say 3 months. They can lose it for 3 months. It's fine. Ops. The work lost for ops. Now, the ops has already produced the thing. So what work are you losing? What you're probably losing is records of what you've made. But ops probably isn't keeping those records. Admin probably is. So ops probably doesn't have anything to lose here. You can still see the thing over there in storage. You didn't lose anything. You don't have any work to lose, effectively. Yeah, you could theoretically think about this from the perspective of moving duplicates onto a separate site in a warehouse and having a physical backup for the things you've produced. But generally, we don't do that in the world. We kind of just ship it. Generally speaking, from what I've seen, this sort of organization I'm thinking of, the RPO is not applicable. They just don't have one. Depends on the way you structured things, though. Admin, in this case, is probably keeping all the records for everybody. And if admin loses those records, it has to backtrack and remake them. Admin is going to say, there's only a certain amount of work that I'm going to want to have to go back and do again. Keep in mind, if admin goes out, it has to get back up and running when it's not doing work, and it has to do whatever it lost since the last backup, which is going to impact that. So if admin takes a week to get back online and it loses a week of work, it is 2 weeks behind. So this matters. This can relate. Just keep that in mind, right? So I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, that this is 1 week. But realistically, for many admin companies, this would be 1 day. You'll kind of see why 1 week makes a lot of sense later for this. But anyways, finance. This is records, record keeping for financial transactions, etc. Very often, the financial institutions they work with will keep those records as well. So you're talking about specifically what finance is losing to be able to do this stuff. I mean, I want to just say not applicable generally, but finance could be looking at records and predictions and work for where they'd be putting investments, and they wouldn't want to necessarily retread ground if they had lessons learned somewhere. But then again, most finance people are very similar to sales, where they just kind of remember this stuff. And they can reproduce it fairly easily because it's just in their head. They can just put it back in. However, they might also say, I don't want to retread my work and do that work. So they might just say, look, you back me up once a week. I don't want a deal. So they might just say, just do it once a week because I could do more, but I don't want to. So they could just choose that. IT usually wants really, really, really frequent backups. They don't want to have to redo stuff all the time. Depending on what you're doing, they can put a lot of work in a day, and doing a week's worth of work again for a lot of them is very miserable. If they're updating systems and they did a week's worth of work on updating the system and then they lose that, it can be a pretty huge resource loss. Also, IT tends to be pretty good at doing backups, and they're pretty good at meeting a short RPO, and they're usually pretty good at doing it fairly inexpensively. So most RPOs I see for IT processes or IT functions specifically come in about between a day and a week. It's usually a day. They're usually doing daily backups. So it's usually a day. Marketing. This is losing data from stuff that like brochures you've made, planning you've done, work you've done that you've digitized, stuff like that. With marketing, often people are working in teams and they've been working together for a long period of time to do certain work. What they've done is still in their head. They've been collaborating on it a long time. You're generally able to reproduce stuff that you've lost with marketing fairly quickly. It kind of depends on what they're making. Like if you've made a PowerPoint, the marketing team's made a presentation and they've done a week's worth of work and then they lose it, they can get the people who made the presentation to remake it again from scratch in less than a week because they've already done it before. They ain't gonna like it, but they can do it. If you're willing to lose marketing for 6 months, you're probably willing to lose the work of marketing and have them remake it again, even if it's a bit slower, for an extended period of time. You're probably willing to lose at least a month of marketing's work in this sort of company's marketing system. Now, we look at these RPOs and we can see, 1 week there, 1 week there, a day there, 3 months there, 1 month there. If this is all largely digital stuff, so this is stuff on a company server, you could pretty easily just say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to back up everything on the company servers once a week, and IT, do your own specific daily backups for your stuff. And this is going to meet sales. Sales is up within a week, or they RPO, they get a week. They ask for 3 months, they get a week. They're not complaining. Admin gets what it wants. Finance gets what it wants. IT is special. It does its own thing. It's probably managing the RPO anyways. And then marketing, it can work with a month, but it gets a week, so it's happy. Just because the RPO is this number doesn't mean you have to do this number. You're going to do this for these other sections anyways. If you can just add these in for very little difference in cost, you just add them in. You know what your target is. Why does this matter? In the event that you outsource one of these departments, you know that if you outsource marketing, for example, you don't want to lose a month worth of work, but you're not backing up something you've outsourced. So you can demand or look for in a contract the thing that you're looking for be met, and you don't have to match it. So just because you always did all of these things together because you could for cheap doesn't mean that you have to forever because some document you made where you looked at this said, oh, I need it by this actually. So when I separate them, I don't have to actually spend the money to do it for that often. I can focus on doing it this often. That sort of idea. Okay, so you get these down. Another thing that you should ideally do is, another column somewhere, write down why you chose these numbers. So come to some sort of idea, come to some sort of conclusion as to why these are the way they are, because if you come back and change them or want to change them, you can look at the reasons and go, is this the same? Someone new ends up working in your continuity process, or, what often will happen is this will get delegated to a specific working group, and then the CEO will come by and be like, run me through this. And then they'll look and they'll say, okay, why is that there? I understand. Okay, that makes sense. Why is that there? No, that we're changing that in 2 months. So sure, we can keep that like that now, but in 2 months, I think we should, that will be different. Hey, working group, if this is now this, what does that number become? And then you can work through why these numbers are the way they are and change things a lot easier. So that's the general idea here of timeline breakpoints. You've got your magic numbers, you've got your names for things, which you can change into whatever you need, and you figure out what your timeline goals here are for getting back up or for backing up or recovering work. That's basically it. There's not much else here until we start taking all the different sections together and mixing them. So yeah, timeline breakpoints.